to Marc. So Marc Esteve del Valle is a researcher in the field of digital communication and social change, and his work is focused on political networks, combining methods from network science, computational social science, and theories of communication studies. So perfectly in line with the aim of this workshop. Today, you will present a cross-country analysis, not involving the US, so not in the line of what we were discussing. And thank you, Marc, to accept our invitation. And the floor is yours whenever you want.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emanuele. Can you hear me properly? I guess yes. Okay, super. Let me just share the screen. Yes. Yeah, I think you can see the screen. So thanks a lot for the invitation. Actually, it's a great pleasure to be here. And thanks a lot also to these previous amazing presentations. So what I'm going to present here is this cross-country analysis between a region, actually, a region of Spain, Catalonia, and the Netherlands. And I entitled this presentation Homophily in Twitter Political Networks, or a cross-country analysis. My name is Marc Esteve del Valle. I'm an assistant professor at the Center for Media and Journalism Studies at the University of Groningen. If you want to know a little bit more about my research, you can visit my website. And if you have any questions and you want to discuss topic related to my research line, please feel free to contact me to this email or get in touch via my Twitter handle. Let me just, I'm gonna move this up here. Yeah, that could be better. Okay, so as I was saying, what I did is I compare basically the degree of homophily and political polarization in the Catalan MPs or parliamentarians mentions Twitter network to the degree of homophily and polarization in the Dutch MPs mentions Twitter network. Now I was listening the two keynotes and I was thinking this presentation is going to fit very well actually with the previous acknowledge that they provided to us. I assume, acknowledge and recognize the limitations of the research. Fabiana was actually pledging for more cross platform studies, and this is exclusively about Twitter. But I think the insights can be interesting and let's say help pushing the field forward. Now you're going to think why MPs, why parliamentarians, they might be a little boring. Well, I don't think so. First, because parliamentarians occupy a key political position in the political process. Second, they have large media and evidently social media audiences. So the implications of their behavior on social media span largely over, potentially can span largely over society. And then also because they represent a wide variety of political leanings, right? And if I was, and the teams that I work with during my PhD in Catalonia and then here in the Netherlands, we were actually interested in measuring homophily and polarization. We needed to find a setting where these different political leanings took place. And the online parliamentary settings, in this case, the Twitter parliamentary networks, were a specific scenario to test for this polarization and homophily. Now, before continuing, why Catalan and Dutch MPs on Twitter? Well, there's a large presence of both MPs on Twitter, 85% in the Parliament of Catalonia and 96% in the Tweede Kamer, which is the Dutch parliament. Of the parliamentarians use Twitter. Then also in terms of the population, well, relevant number of Twitter users in Catalonia, 10% of the population, around 10%, and in the Netherlands, around 17%. And then, and we were talking about it, the necessity of expanding the studies beyond, those conducting beyond the United States Congress and Senate. So that's the main three reasons. There are other reasons that if you are interested in knowing a little bit more, at the end of the presentation, I will share with you the paper where this research was published. So not the paper, the journal where this research has been published. All right, so this is the three main reasons. Now, a little bit of terminological precision here. What do I mean when I say homophily? Oops, sorry. Well, basically, homophily is this principle asserting that the contact between similar people occur a higher rate than among dissimilar people. That's his famous paper by McPherson et al., 2001. And then there are two different types of homophily as defined by Lazarsfeld and Merton. One is the status homophily, which comprises both ascribed characteristics, age, race, sex, class, and ethnicity, and acquired characteristics, occupation, religion, and education. And there is a second type of homophily, which is the value homophily, which refers to the association with others with similar attitudes, values, and beliefs. Now, why homophily is important? The study of homophily is so relevant, especially in relation with our communication on social media. And we already mentioned here during the last two keynotes several of the reasons, but it's quite different to see the world from let's say homophilious perspective. So the one on the left side of this slide, where you have, I imagine you are one member of this blue subnetwork, and you don't have completely any type of contact with any of the members of this, say, orange-ish subnetwork here. So there are already plenty of studies basically stating that not having this contact, being trapped into this so-called, sometimes badly called homophilious echo chambers, increase intolerant political behavior, radicalization, and we have been speaking about this, right? So having a completely different type of vision of the world is the one that a person being in this second type of network, so this heterophilic network I have, someone that interacts with people having, for instance, different political ideologies, and hence, thanks to this interaction, is able to build more robust arguments and is able to be more tolerant vis-a-vis the opinions of other people. So this is why homophily is so important, and this is why homophily actually has been found to increase, as I was saying, polarization and intolerance in the realm of politics. Now, this being said, here I'm talking about one specific type of polarization, and I think that it's important to be precise on what I'm studying in this research. I'm not studying effective polarization. What I will try to find out is interactional polarization. Now, what is this interactional polarization? It's the increasingly, and use this definition by Yachi et al., increasingly, so the fact that participants in a debate increasingly interact with like-minded individuals while disengaging from interactions with others who hold opposing viewpoints. All right, so is this creation of echo chambers also a concept that we have been already discussing in the previous keynote presentations. Now, there has been a lot of debate also in parliamentary Twitter networks about the presence or not presence of this interactional polarization. Some have argued that yes, parliamentarians' use of Twitter increased this interactional polarization. For example, this is a study of Koiran and colleagues about the Finnish parliamentarians' use of Twitter. They studied only one specific subnetwork of Twitter, which was actually the following follower subnetwork, and they discovered that yes, parliamentarians' use of this Twitter network increase this interactional polarization so that they split apart, that they fall into these echo chambers. And then myself and other people, we also tested for the existence or non-existence of this interactional polarization. And although we found that yes, there is some presence of this interactional, of this interactional polarization, which is built on this basis of this homophilous pattern of parliamentarians. There's also space for cross interactions between parliamentarians of ideologically opposed political leanings. Okay, so it's I would say a more nuanced picture of this phenomenon of homophily and political polarization in social media. Exactly what we were saying before. Now, what did we do? So we have two research questions, broadly speaking. Our first research question was, to what extent do mentioned ties among Catalan MPs and among Dutch parliamentarians show homophily? And then there was a second one. Is there a relation between the degree of homophily among Catalan MPs mentions and among Dutch MPs mentions and the degree of political polarization of each of the parliamentary mentions networks? Some hypotheses. We had one first hypothesis related to say the characteristics of the networks, which is this reciprocity. So the fact that parliamentarians communicate with other parliamentarians in the same, so in a mutual way. Hypothesis one says the reciprocity in the Catalan MPs mentioned with the network, the Dutch MPs mentioned with the network, is assumed to significantly explain the communication ties among the members of each network. And then we had four hypotheses related to these two different levels of homophily. Okay, status and value homophily. So value homophily, second hypothesis, ideological homophily. Catalan and Dutch MPs are highly likely to mention all the Catalan and Dutch MPs with the same political ideology. And then the three related to the status homophily. Leadership, one related to the leadership position homophily. So Catalan and Dutch MPs in leadership positions are likely to mention all the Catalan and Dutch MPs in leadership positions. Another one, hypothesis 4, related to the age homophily. Young, so between 26 and 44 years old, Catalan and Dutch MPs are likely to mention all the young Catalan and Dutch MPs. The last one, about the gender homophily. So Catalan and Dutch MPs are highly likely to mention Catalan and Dutch MPs of the same gender. About the data, these are basically, I collected data in two different periods of time. One, because the data from Catalonia came from my studies during the PhD. So I collected data from 116 Catalan parliamentarians, which was scrapped to retrieve all the mentions. This is 19,506 from January 1st, 2013 until March 31, 2014. And then I used Costo and Python to build a one-year sample network of 7,356 mentions posted by 144 Dutch MPs between November 3, 2015 and November 3, 2016. The data was collected during non-electoral periods because we wanted to grasp the communication of parliamentarians outside of these electoral periods, which can actually boost this or provide an incentive to increase polarization. The descriptive statistics of the networks and the external internal index were obtained actually by using USINet. So most of you, I guess, you know already this software, but it's a software package for the analysis of social network data. The visualizations were built by using Gephi, and then I ran the model by using these exponential random graph models using R and the StatNet package. Now, this is important to be able to understand afterwards the results, or better contextualize the results, and for the discussion, I guess, also that we're going to have here and during the roundtable. What I'm studying is two completely different political contexts, Catalonia and the Netherlands. And the data of Catalonia was collected basically during the 2014. And this is a period of time where there was these demands for independence in Catalonia that is split mostly the Catalan society, hence the Catalan politicians, into those in favor and those against the independence of Catalonia. As for the structure of the Parliament of Catalonia, at that time it was basically divided in 7 parties and 2 political axes. Those, as I was saying, against and in favor of the Catalan independence. So the nationalist axis, and then the left, right, in economic terms speaking, political axis. As for the Netherlands, picture gets here much more complicated. I guess studying politics, parliamentarian politics in the Netherlands is quite complicated, even more intuitive, I would say. So the period that I collected the data for the Tweede Kamer, there was 11 medium-sized parties running from extreme right parties, so the party of hair builders, extreme right, to extreme left parties like the Socialist Party. Now, some figures about the characteristics of the networks. Cannot go into detail of all these characteristics. Of course, this is the number of parliamentarians. I was already mentioning this before, 116 and 114. But let's gonna focus on these 2 arrows here. The density, as we can see here, the density in the Catalan of the MPs mentioned, in the case of the Catalan MPs mentioned to the network, is much lower than in the case of the Dutch MPs. This indicates already that there are less relationships among the Catalan MPs than among the Dutch MPs. And another interesting already figure here about the modularity. You see the modularity in the case of Catalan MPs. So for those of you perhaps that you don't know modularity, and how many subgroups the network is split. In the Catalan MPs Twitter, parliamentarians Twitter network was 5.5, let's say, groups, and in the case of the Dutch MPs, much lower, so 3 groups. Okay, it already shows, let's say, a much cohesive network in the case of the Dutch MPs than in the case of the Catalan MPs, much more split into different groups. All right, now, what about the results? And I don't have time here to go over and explain you all the characteristics of these exponential random graph models, but we can take a look at the significant levels of the results and see if we observe or if we can corroborate or neglect these different hypotheses related to, again, these 2 types of homophily. Okay, the value, the ones that I was mentioning before. Right. The first one that I want to mention is the case of mutuality, which is the baseline model in the network to run this exponential random graph model. So the effect of mutually mentioning each other that increases or not a homophily in these 2 communication networks. And what we observe is that in the case of Catalan MPs, this is significant, but not in the case of Dutch MPs. So we cannot say a lot about the effect of homophily on the increase, of mutuality on the increase of this homophily. Now, this is perhaps the most important finding of the research about the value homophily. The ideology of the parliamentarians. Now we can see here that in the case of the Catalan MPs, being on the left or on the right of the political spectrum, especially being on the left of so being a left parliamentarian, let's say, increase a lot the likelihood of having communication ties with parliamentarians of the left of the political spectrum in the chamber, a lot, by double, okay, the likelihood. But this didn't happen in the case of the Dutch MPs all the way around. It decreased almost by 20%, 18.4, to be more specific, the likelihood of being mentioned by other MPs from the same political leaning. Now, for the right, we see that in the case of the Catalan MPs, it increased 42.3%, the likelihood of being mentioned by MPs of the same political leaning. But in the case of the Netherlands, we don't observe any type of effect. Okay, so what we can say already, based on this data, is that the Catalan MPs Twitter mention network is much more homophilous in terms of the ideology than the Dutch MPs, okay, which is actually not homophilous in that regard. As for the other characteristics, the political position, here the effect is significant but very low and only for the Catalan MPs. So this means that Catalan MPs holding a political, not being leaders in the network, they have a tendency to mention those that they were not leaders. Now, another interesting result, and this time which is actually aligned, let's say, in both Twitter networks, is the fact that the age explained actually the likelihood of MPs in both networks of being mentioned by MPs of the same age. So MPs between the age of 26 and 44 are much more likely to be mentioned, especially in the case of the Catalan MPs, by MPs of the same age band or cohort than the rest of MPs. We don't observe this especially for the Dutch. For the Catalans, we don't observe, well, the significant level is negative. And finally, about the gender, what we observe is that for the case of the Catalan MPs, being a female is not a homophilous pattern. Let's say that female MPs didn't mention other female MPs, but for the Dutch MPs Twitter network, we can say that yes. So the likelihood of female MPs to mention other female MPs was higher than to mention other parliamentarians. Now, visually, and here what I'm showing to you is this GAFI visual representation of the mentions, the Twitter parliamentarians in both networks. On the left side, you have the network of the Catalan MPs, and on the right side, you have the network of Dutch MPs. What you can see is the clear split of these two communities between left and right. So this ideological value homophily in the case of the Catalan MPs, whereas in the case of the Dutch MPs, we do not observe this. What we observe is a heterophilous, as I was mentioning this at the beginning, communication pattern. Now, as I was telling to you, we didn't stop here at measuring the homophily or the degree of homophily in the network, but what we wanted to measure also is how this translated into, or potentially translated into a degree of interactional political polarization. And we calculated the external internal index, so the number of mentions among the parliamentarians of the same group, which the maximum level will be -1, and the number of mentions to the parliamentarians of the other group, which the maximum level would be +1. And as we can see, the results of the rescale external internal index show that in the case of the Catalan MPs, there is a degree of interactional polarization, whereas in the case of the Dutch MPs, we do not observe. What we observe is a much more heterophilous communicative behavior among the Dutch MPs. So all in all, and as for, let's say, food for thought and the discussion, so what we see is that the communication ties among Catalan MPs are much more homophilous and polarized than the communication ties among the Dutch parliamentarians. About the status homophily, the most remarkable, let's say, finding is that the high levels of homophily among the mentions of young Catalan and Dutch MPs, and this fits, say, or aligns very well with previous research in Twitter parliamentary networks, which already pointed a much higher use of Twitter among young parliamentarians. So that I would say this is natural. Now, what is very surprising is this disparity in the level of value homophily. When I conducted this analysis of the Dutch parliamentarians' use of Twitter, I was expecting to find also a level or an important degree of homophily and polarization in the use of Twitter among Dutch MPs, and this actually didn't happen. Whereas in the case of the Catalan MPs, it happened and a lot. And this points to what I wanted to mention here and aligns very well, as I was saying, with the other two keynotes, which is the necessity of taking into account the political context. So we need to find ways to bring in these different political contexts, these different cultures of interaction on Twitter too. Not only in the parliamentary chambers, let's say face-to-face, but also on Twitter. And what do I mean by these different ways of interacting also on social media? Well, whereas in the Netherlands, there is a strong culture of negotiation and consultation, I do not see this yet among the Catalan MPs. And this might be related to several reasons which transcend the focus of this study, but I suspect that it might be related to, in the case of Catalonia, the specific political context, also the specific democratic culture of the institution, which is relatively, let's say, much younger democracy than the Netherlands. So it's difficult to let's say, try to bring in all these factors, but we need to find a way to broaden and expand our analysis to other social media and also to other sociological, psychological factors. And this is all what I wanted to say. As I mentioned before, this research has been published already, so you can find the research here. It was published recently in this year in the journal Media and Communication. And thanks a lot to all of you. As I was saying, do not hesitate in contacting me if you want to keep talking about this type of research.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you a lot for your presentation. So we have time for questions or comments from the audience. I will check on both platforms if we have any comments or questions. So, sorry, I'm trying to see if we have comments on what? Seems not. So I have a couple of questions on that. So you mentioned that data for this studio were from 2016 or 14, something like that. So then you had a big change of the Catalan political party organization, and new party enters, old party come out of the chamber. So what is your intuition of what you would encounter if you repeat today this kind of study? Because this kind of things has changed a lot, so in the context also.
My intuition, I think, yeah, polarization remains and transcends, as I was saying, the use of social media. So it's a social polarization. So parliamentarians are a reflect of this polarization. Catalan society, although maybe a little bit less, but it's still split into these two blocks. So probably what we will find is still this homophilous pattern of communication among parliamentarians, which translate into this at least interactional polarization. I would be very much interested also in studying affective polarization that I was saying there. If affective polarization has increased or not, or decreased, that would be also interesting to study. But I would say, answering to your question, Emanuele, I think that remains, that's still there. Now, the issue here is that for basically money constraints, normally we cannot, or we are not able to run this longitudinal analysis and cross, let's say, several countries' studies, which is a pity. So my pledge is also to to try to study these phenomena longitudinally and across different countries as much as possible, and outside of this European Parliament. Yes, if possible.
Yeah. See, yes, thank you. And with your answer, the second question I have also come in because you mentioned these two axes, the left and right, and the pro and against the independence axis, but then you find that just the left and right axis explain all the homophily you have in the network. There is no effect of the pro-independence against independence. So this is quite interesting. So didn't you find statistical relevance, or there is no? I mean,
yeah, no, it's a very good point. When I study, let me just think. When I study, no, I didn't input this. No, this basically I didn't use this factor because for the sake of comparison. So I couldn't use the factor for the Dutch parliamentary system because there is no axis. So then I didn't use it. But no, because I also did trials, no, and inputting the factors for the Catalan piece. I think that I input the nationalists, but I don't recall now exactly what I got. So I don't want to say if I found that this factor was very relevant for the case of the Catalan MPs Twitter network. But I can double check it and I can share with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was curious also on the language factor because Catalan is a bilingual country. So if you have parliamentaries that are talking in one or the two languages more than the other, I would expect that this will affect the type of parliamentarians that they will mention. Did you check for this? Did you expect something?
No, I didn't check because it's as I was saying, I only focus on this interactional polarization. So basically the number of mentions. So I didn't check for the language, but that's a good point. That could be very interesting also. I know, because I know the nature of the Catalan parliament, that left parties and let's say parties in favor of the independence, they are more inclined to using this Catalan language than those that they are more reluctant or that they basically reject the idea of independence. So I wouldn't be surprised to find a significant level of language, so homophily, let's say, among Catalan MPs using the same language. But again, I will need to have the results to make any robust claim. Yeah. And as for the Dutch, it's easy. They all speak mostly Dutch, although few of them, they also tweet quite a lot in English. Few, very few. But yeah. The Americanization of Dutch politics and society is quite high.
Thank you, Marc. And if there is no other question here, I will check on VOA. There are many people attending on VOA, but nobody want to ask nothing. So thank you, Marc, again, and thank you to all the keynote speakers. We can go for a break now, and we will back at 4:30 in Central European time for this panel discussion. And after the panel discussion, the last presentation of the PCNet with Camille Roth video. So thank you again to all of us, and we will see in a few minutes.